Hey friends, this is Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and today I want to talk to you about some alternatives to freezer meals and some ways that you can do some food prep, particularly for a large family, without the use of a freezer. First, I want to apologize for my voice. I choked on my hot tea this morning and it kind of went down the wrong pipe, and so I'm not sick, but my throat is just feeling kind of weird and I feel like it's affecting my voice. So hopefully I can get through this video. So forgive my voice. But anyways, I'm going to be doing a little bit of talking in the beginning of this video about ways that I'm preparing meals in advance before my baby comes here in a couple weeks. And then I'm going to show you a meal that I'm actually working on this week. We're going to can some Sloppy Joe meat. So if you're looking for the Sloppy Joe recipe, that's toward the end of the video. But first I just kind of want to chat a little bit. There are many ways that you can prepare meals ahead for difficult times in your life. As a large family, we go through very busy seasons. It doesn't even have to be the birth of a baby or sickness in the house or anything like that. There are times when gardening season occupies all of my energy, and by the end of the day, I don't want to make a dinner. And so it's really convenient to have some options that are already prepared ahead of time to feed your family. And one of the most common ways that people do that is through freezer meals. And I think that's a wonderful option for families that enjoy those meals and who have the freezer space to do that. Unfortunately for my family, it just isn't an option. First of all, we have some dietary issues that I'm going to get into that kind of prevent us from enjoying freezer meals, but also we lack the freezer space. We already have a large commercial deep freezer, 2 other deep freezers, and then 2 fridges. And that uses enough energy in our house. I don't want to have another freezer anywhere in my house. I'm sort of told Adam, like, I'm done. We use the space we have. I will can up anything that can't fit in the freezer, and I do not want to plug more appliances in and increase our electric bill. So for us, especially with a large family, freezer meals just aren't an option then, because one meal takes up a lot of square footage in a freezer. And so I look to other ways to prepare food ahead of time that won't use freezer space. The dietary issues that I talked about, the majority of good freezer meal recipes are very dairy heavy. They rely on a lot of, because they're casseroles usually, they rely on a lot of dairy as like a binder to hold the casserole together. So they're very heavy in cheese and sour cream and a lot of like cream of mushroom soups and things like that. And those are things, because my son has an anaphylactic dairy allergy, we cannot have dairy in our house. And so there just aren't a lot of options for us for freezer meals, even if we did have the freezer space. So let me talk a little bit about alternatives to freezer meals that you can look to making for your family if you also have those issues. So obviously I'm sitting here in front of my canning shelves, and if you followed me for a while, you guys know I love to can food. And I don't just like to can single ingredient foods, meaning canning just carrots or potatoes or things like that I do have on my shelf back here. Another great thing about canning is that you can can whole meals. And so that is one of the first things that I'm focusing on in preparing meals ahead of time for my family for before the baby comes. So you guys, I don't know if you remember, a couple months ago I made a list of all of the things that I would like to have on my pantry shelves, all canned up and cooked and ready for my family to make convenient meals. And I've worked through probably about half of it, and I'm still working here. That's what I'm focusing on in these last couple of weeks, just resting and doing a little bit of food prep. But canning meals is super convenient. I have several examples right here of some meals in jars that I have made. This is a white chicken chili. It's a base, and I'm going to talk about why I can soup bases here in a minute. But we have white chicken chili that I've done a batch of this for my family. We have just some tomato-based vegetable soup, refried beans, This is a base for a chicken pot pie or just a chicken noodle soup. This is just regular chili made with beef. We have beef stew. We have lots of dried canned beans. We have lots of canned meat. And then lots of pie fillings ready to go. This is on top of many other convenience items that I've canned, but this is just a sampling of more things that would make meals. And so let's talk about how these can be made into meals for a large family, because, you know, I have 7, soon to be 8 children. This isn't going to go very far, right? This one little quart isn't going to feed potentially 10 people, which is going to be the size of our family soon. So that what I do when I'm canning my meals ahead of time is I make bases, like I mentioned. This is just a concentrated base for a white chicken chili. And then what I would do is when I want to actually make the chili, I would dump this into my pot with a quart of beans to be added to the chili, maybe with another quart of broth, and then I can heat it up together, and those 3 quarts combined will be enough to feed my family. And so that's what we do. And that's 3 little quart jars sitting on a shelf for a meal versus, you know, a huge pot of soup that I would have to fit in the freezer for a potential meal in the future. So it saves a lot of space doing this. I do the same thing with other things, like I mentioned that this could be chicken pot pie. So obviously it's still liquidy. So all I would do is take one of these jars, dump it onto the stove. I add my thickener, which will kind of thicken it up and make it that pot pie filling. And then I can pour it into my pie shell and be ready to go. So that is one way that I focus on making meals instead of doing freezer meals here in my house. And just for me, it's a much more efficient use of space. It's a more efficient use of energy. I don't have to, you know, run up my electric bill by having a whole freezer dedicated to meals. And what I like about them is they are already cooked. So the canning process cooks the meat, cooks the vegetables, all of the flavors are all mixed together. Literally all I have to do when I want to make a meal is just warm up the jar and it's ready to go. Versus with freezer meals, sometimes you have to think ahead, pull it out and thaw it, or you have to wait for it to bake or whatever. So this is just, for me, the ultimate convenience is having meals in jars. If you're interested in any of the recipes for any of these items that I mentioned, I'm going to list the videos where I go through the process for how I made these in the video description. You can go back and watch those. Let me talk about another method though. Maybe you don't like canning. Another method that's great is freeze drying. This is my freeze dryer back here. You guys have seen me use it in other videos. We have a Harvest Right. We have a medium size freeze dryer with the Premier oil pump, and it's perfect for our family. We are a large family, but I find I don't need anything bigger than this. It works just fine. And so what I do a lot is when we have like leftovers from meals, I will throw them in the freeze dryer, and these make shelf stable little packaged meals. So I just grabbed a few from my food storage just to give you an idea of some items. So for example, this was a meal that was like beef, vegetables, and gravy, and it looks like I made this almost a year ago, almost exactly. It was on November 24th, 2021, and actually freeze-dried food, if stored properly, will be good for 15 to 20 years. So it doesn't matter that it's a year old. It's in this Mylar with an oxygen absorber. But this is an instant meal. It's already cooked, already prepared. If we need a quick meal, I can just put this in a pot, rehydrate it with some water, and I've got beef, vegetables, and gravy ready to go. We do, here's a veggie soup. So I have vegetable soup here that's canned. I also have vegetable soup that is freeze-dried, and same thing. All I have to do is add a little broth or add a little water to this, rehydrate it, warm it up, and this would be a great like individual serving of soup for one of my children if they're hungry one day, and then I don't have to cook it for them. We do the same thing. Oatmeal, anytime I have extra oatmeal, I throw it on a tray and freeze dry it. And then I literally have instant oats that the children they can add a little bit of almond milk to it, add a little hot water to it, rehydrate it. Oatmeal's all ready to go. So freeze drying is another great option if you have a freeze drying machine in lieu of making freezer meals. So for me, heading into this season with a newborn baby, it's different than previous seasons for me where I'm preparing meals ahead of time. When I was in a very busy season with just young children, like for example, when I had my fourth baby, I had 4 children then that were age 5 and under. I didn't have helpers that were capable in the kitchen, so meal prep and everything fell completely on me. And so during that time of my life, I focused a lot on making breakfasts ahead of time before a baby came, because I felt like that was one of the hardest meals of the day for me to prepare. All the kids woke up, the baby needed nursed first thing in the morning, and it was just like chaos for me to try to get breakfast made in the middle of all these children saying, you know, I'm hungry, and a crying baby and all of that. And so I really focused on, like, I would make waffles up and pancakes and things like that, and I would freeze them. But since we're entering this different phase of life where I have older children that are capable helpers, breakfast isn't really an issue for me. I can sit down, put my feet up, nurse the baby in the morning, and one of my teens can very easily prepare some oatmeal or, you know, make some waffles in the waffle maker, and it's really not that difficult for them. So I don't have to worry about breakfast anymore. What I really focused on preparing during this season of life is lunches. Dinners are pretty easy. Once I get breakfast all taken care of and I have a quick minute, I can throw a roast in the crock pot or something like that, and it'll be ready by dinner time. So that isn't a concern of mine, getting dinner on the table. But lunch is the hardest meal of the day for me as a busy mom with lots of children who homeschools, because the children, during that time where I'm doing lunch prep, they're doing school lessons. And if the baby is crying and wants to be nursed, I can't interrupt one of my children from the middle of their schoolwork and say, hey, will you go in and make lunch? I want them focusing on their schoolwork. Lunch falls on me typically. And so when I made all of these canned foods, I made them with lunch in mind. So the serving sizes for our lunches are generally a little bit smaller than the serving size would be for dinner. So just 2 or 3 quart jars will typically feed my children enough for lunch. And you notice that a lot of these that I made are soup items. So all I have to do is add some crackers or some homemade bread or some biscuits or something to the soup, and they're getting, you know, some protein, veggies, and a little side of carbs with whatever bread that I give them, and they are good to go for lunch. So I feel like these canned meals are ideal for making lunches. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today. Another lunch item, excuse me, sloppy joes are something that my children love. I mean, what child doesn't love sloppy joes, right? And it's a really easy lunch item to make, especially if it's canned, because the meat is already browned up and cooked. Everything's mixed together in the jar. It's like going to the grocery store and buying a jar of, you know, Manwich or whatever it is. It's all ready to go, except it's made with, you know, homemade ingredients. You know exactly what's in it. There's none of the nasty additives and preservatives and things. So that is what we're going to do today. So why don't I go ahead and show you my method for canning sloppy joe meat, and so you can make that for your family if that's something that you enjoy. All right, guys, we're going to start by pre-cooking this meat. I am using ground beef. This is our homegrown beef that we just harvested in the early fall. And we're going to do, if you want to do 7 quarts, a full batch of the sloppy joe mix, you're going to want to use approximately 12 pounds of beef. You're going to use a little bit over 1.5 pounds of meat per quart jar. I think it's about 1.7 pounds. So you're just going to want to thaw it out and get it all cooked up. I prefer to put it all in a roasting pan and just stick it in the oven and let it cook for a little bit. Now we want to pre-cook this meat because beef releases a whole lot of grease. As you know that, we get a lot of hamburger grease. And if there's too much grease in our canning jars, that can siphon out of the jars during the pressure canning process and can definitely affect the seal of your jar. So pre-cooking the meat allows us to drain off the majority of that grease, and then it won't affect our seal. The amount of grease that's left in the jar will be pretty negligible, and our seals will work just fine. So there we go. We've got it mostly cooked. I'd say it's about 75-80% cooked. We're going to drain off that excess grease that I was talking about, and then we will start filling our jars with the rest of the contents. Here I have some onion and some pepper. These are sweet peppers. I've put them in a blender here. I'm going to blend those together and add it to our meat mixture. We've got some ketchup. We've got some mustard, a little bit of blackstrap molasses. We're going to do some chili powder, some black pepper, and some salt. We're just keeping it really simple for this sloppy Joe mix. Now, sometimes when I make sloppy Joe mix, we will make it from scratch. You can start out with some tomato paste, and instead of using ketchup, store-bought ketchup, you can kind of do your own tomato base out of a tomato paste, add your own brown sugar, some other things, but it's just as easy to use the ketchup, and we're trying to keep this as simple as possible for me because I don't have a lot of energy these days. This belly's getting pretty big. So as I mentioned, we already drained the grease. I've got my peppers and onions in my blender. We are blending that up. We don't want huge chunks in our sloppy Joe meat. I actually like to get it pureed down pretty smoothly. It's just in there for the flavor and the nutrition for the kids. But I don't want them to notice big chunks of pepper and onion when they bite into their sandwiches. So there we go. We're just going to kind of mix that around into our meat mixture. And then I'm going to add this entire container of ketchup. This is my favorite brand of ketchup. I get it from Aldi. I found that Aldi has the best price on organic ketchup that isn't corn syrup based. Their organic ketchup. It does have sugar in it, but I believe it's a little healthier, and it's a great price there. We're also going to add some mustard. I get this brand of mustard from Azure Standard, and I buy it in bulk. And we're just going to do about half of the bottle of mustard. Everybody has a different method for making sloppy joes. This is just a quick convenience food for small children. It's nothing fancy. I like to add a little blackstrap molasses here. Since my ketchup is already sweetened, I don't need to add brown sugar, but I do like the brown sugar flavor. So that molasses will kind of give that added brown sugar flavor to the meat. But you can do whatever you want here. It's just a quick meal for kids. Make it how they like it, and then we're just going to can it up when we're all done. Adding our chili powder now, just a little bit. My kids don't like it super spicy, but you could add whatever amount you want. Adding our salt and pepper, and then that's it, guys. We're getting that all mixed together. And then all we have to do when it's all mixed is fill our jars up. Now I know this doesn't look super wet right now. It looks rather dry, but that is for a reason. As I mentioned, this meat is probably only 80% cooked. As this pressure cans, the meat is going to release a little more grease, a little more liquid. And so by the time we're all done with the canning process, this meat will be about the perfect texture for a sandwich. With sloppy Joe meat, you don't want it so wet that it's making your bun soggy or anything like that, but you also don't want it super dry. You want to taste that sauce. So for me, this is just how I like to do it. You could do it any way you like. So we're packing these jars in, and I am leaving a pretty big headspace on these. I'm going to leave about 2 inches of headspace. And that's on purpose because, like I said, this meat is going to release a little bit of grease during the cooking process, and I don't want too little of headspace that would allow that grease to siphon out of the jar and affect that seal that I was talking about. So I feel like 2 inches of headspace is about the perfect amount. And you can see here, I'm only filling 6-quart jars, and that's because I set aside some meat for the kids to have for lunch that day. So we're just doing a 6-quart batch instead of a full 7-quart batch. And once our jars are full here, always remember to wipe the rims of your jars, especially with something as greasy as meat like this. Any of that grease that's residual left on the rim there could potentially affect your seal. And you don't want to go to all of this work to have seal failures. We're just getting our lids there. You can check out a link in the description of this video to get a discount on some canning lids. And then I am having quite a problem here getting this ring on this jar. I don't know what's going on. I'm blaming it on pregnancy brain or something. Finally got it on there. But now we're just going to get our rings on these jars and get them ready to go into the pressure canner. These are going to process in the pressure canner for 90 minutes. And at my elevation, we do 10 psi. You obviously would need to adjust that based on your own elevation. There we go. This is what it looks like before it goes into the canner. And then here's what it looks like coming out. As I mentioned, you can see that 2-inch headspace disappeared now. We've got about 1 inch left, and that's because of all of that hamburger grease that was released through the canning process. And then as this cools down, that level of liquid will go down a little bit, and then it's going to look like this. So there we go. Shelf-stable meal. When we want to eat Sloppy Joe, we can just take 1 or 2 of these jars off the shelf, warm them up, and the kids have a quick lunch. All right, friends, so hopefully you enjoyed that little tutorial on how to can Sloppy Joe meat. We surely will enjoy those jars as meals here coming up in the coming months. With everything I showed you that I have canned up, this should provide, if I added it all together, it would be enough lunches for us for probably a month. And that is wonderful, then I don't have to worry about it. And of course, there are days where the children are perfectly capable of making some sun butter and jelly sandwiches or something else for lunch and not have to use these jars. But it's good to know that if we get busy or if there isn't something like sun butter in the house, that we have enough food stored up that I don't have to worry about making lunch for a whole month after the baby is born. And that was my goal. So what I'm focusing now on now, that most of my canning is done. All I really want to can a little more of at this point is some dried beans, because I just like having those all cooked up and ready to go in the jars. It's much easier than having to think about wanting beans the night before, soaking them overnight to make them easier to digest, taking several hours to cook them before lunchtime or whatever. I just, I'm gonna be busy with the baby. And so having jars of pre-cooked beans on the shelf is going to be very helpful for me. So I'm focusing on that here in the next couple weeks. I'm also going to be canning up some roasts. I love canned roast meat. It becomes so tender through the pressure canning process that it just falls apart when you have it come out of the jar. But the greatest part is that it's already cooked. So if I want to make something like barbecue beef sandwiches for lunch, I can just drain the broth out of that jar and save it for a future batch of soup and just put it in a pot with some barbecue sauce and heat it up, and it is ready to go for sandwiches. So having that roast on the shelf stable, cooked up, will be super helpful for me. So that is the other goal here in the next couple weeks. There are a few things I'm going to make ahead and freeze. I will be trying to make some biscuits ahead of time and get them in the freezer. I would like to do some pie crusts, just because I already have a lot of pie filling canned up. It would be really nice to already have pie crusts in the freezer that I can just pull out to make a pie for my family. But really, I'm at the point now where I have a baker. I have a son who loves to bake, so if I need bread or I need a pie crust, I can also just ask him to take a couple minutes and go prepare that for me. That is a huge blessing. But I know I was once a mom who didn't have that option. I didn't have big helpers, so in that case, having it in the freezer ready to go is the only solution to making life easier. So Hopefully you found this video helpful. I know not everyone has a ton of freezer space, so I just wanted to, I guess, show you how we can also have convenient meals without needing all of that extra freezer room. And so if you're interested in getting started with pressure canning, I know that's a huge barrier for a lot of people. They see these meals in a jar and they're like, I would love to do that, but you've never pressure canned before, and this seems very intimidating, scary, or even dangerous because you hear stories of botulism or whatever. I want to encourage you that you can do this. Get yourself something like a ball canning guide, the Ball Blue Book. I love it. It's a great intro to canning. I'll link that in the description for you. And you just start with something easy and cheap like dried beans. They don't cost a lot, so if you mess up, you're not out a bunch of money like you would be if you were canning meat or homegrown veggies or things like that. So just try with some dried beans, and once you get the hang of pressure canning, you know, it's not that different to can dried beans versus doing meat. And I promise you, you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And it's a great way to get some delicious, homegrown, homemade food, shelf-stable, ready to go for those days that get a little crazy and you just want to dump some food into a pot, heat it up, and have a meal ready for your family. All right, guys, as of when this video comes out, we're still on baby watch, and so I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on what happens here in the coming weeks. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving with your family. I know we certainly did, and I am thankful for all of you. Thank you so much for watching our videos and supporting our family and praying for us as we anticipate the coming arrival of our newest baby. I can't thank you enough for everything you do for our family. So until next week, bye friends.